So today I have the pleasure to introduce you Natalia Calvo. She's a Ph.D. student at the Uppsala University in Sweden, and she has also been working in the European project ANIMATAS. Her research is about modeling trust in child-robot interactions, so that will be the topic for today, and I'm looking forward to hear more about this subject. So Natalia.
Okay, so thank you for the introduction. So I'm super happy and honored to be here today, and I want to thank you for because you opened this space for all of us, and I think it's super nice to share our research and to talk to you people in general and have these kind of discussions. So as Joanna mentioned, my research focuses on modeling trust in child-robot interaction. And today I want to talk about how actually children build a trust model of a social robot in the first encounter. So let me see. Okay, perfect. So today, this is the overview. So first, I want to talk about how trust is conceptualized. And I will mention this study that I have done in collaboration with my colleague, Rebecca Stower. And then I will focus on the paper, The Effects of Robot Facial Expressions of Children's First Impression of Trustworthiness. That is the main paper of this talk. So let's start to talk about a bit of theory, and I want to mention actually that literature have identified three factors that may affect trust in human-robot interaction, and those, I don't know, okay, these factors are human, robot, and context or environmental related factors. But actually, Hancock in 2011, he found that robot-related factors seem to have a significant effect on trust perception, and he identified those, or he classified those factors into groups, like performance-based factors that are related to robots' behavior, dependability, reliability, and the other group is attribute-based factors that are more related to robot's proximity, robot's personality, adaptability, robot type, and anthropomorphism. So he said that actually those only dependability, reliability, and robot personality seem to have an effect on trust perception. But this year he published an updated version of his meta-analysis, and he also found that task difficulty, robot reliability, and proximity also can influence or this distrust in robots. However, if we want to understand a bit better what is this the role of these factors, we need actually to know what is trust and how it is defined. So actually the definition of trust is also coming from psychology, when we can find different kind of models for trust organization, game theory, like the prisoner's dilemma or trust-based paradigm. This kind of maybe models that has been proposed to conceptualize trust, but also for different kind of definitions for interpersonal trust has been proposed. For example, this one proposed by Rotter back in 1967. However, it's important to say that across these theories from psychology, we can say that when we are defining trust, there are two different dimensions that emerge. And the first dimension is more related to warmth, that is the perceived benevolence or affective relationship. And the second dimension is more related to competence, that is competence and reliability. And this is crucial because actually in human-robot interaction, this distinction has been studied. However, now is the question if we can actually study or we can investigate that distinction in child-robot interaction and how we can measure trust. So This is now I want to talk about how actually what is the state of the art of trust in child-robot interaction. And when we are talking as Hancock proposed, okay, the robot-related factors are the factors who seem to have an effect on trust. So actually, yes, like the most of the studies like try to investigate those kind of factors that are robots' personality, environment, and role. However, the results are not um, like it's consistent with the thing that Hancock found in human-robot interaction. And with human-robot interaction, I meant more studies with adults. So the literature shows that indeed, actually, robots' responsiveness seems to have a positive effect on trust perception. However, robots' embodiment and robots' personality that we saw that had a strong effect on trust before in children seem that don't have an effect at all. And concerning robots' expressiveness, robots' role, and robots' adaptation, there are different findings. Like some studies suggest that there is a positive effect or a negative effect. So by saying that, this I think is we found that it's a bit difficult also to conceptualize trust in child-robot interaction. We found two main reasons. The first reason is that there are different concepts also in child-robot interaction, and there are different ways or methods that researchers have used to capture trust, children's trust in robots. And the other issue is that there's different or the inconsistent findings. So in order to start to investigate a bit more trust definition, my colleague Rebecca Stover and I decided to run this meta-analysis, and we started by actually try to classify these two dimensions of trust. So we first choose social trust, and we started to investigate this definition of social trust as the belief that the robot will keep their promises. And we start look for studies that have measured self-disclosure, secret keeping. And on the other hand, we have competency trust that was more with this a concept of perceived competency or reliability of the robot. And we were looking for studies with measures of following instructions and for choice. And at this point, also we found that children, they rely on different kind of information when they determine whom to trust. And this is why, for example, terms as friendliness, closeness, or rapport sometimes overlap with social trust. So also we decided to investigate this kind of prosocial behaviors or this kind of constructs, and we collect studies that measure being friends with the robot and liking the robot. So yeah, let's move. So I will talk about this a bit maybe faster. So our method was we collect we look for different studies with this kind of keywords like robot, child, trust, secret, share, disclose, error, friend, and mistake. And we end up with a pool of around 500 records, which 36 qualify for qualitative synthesis, and only 20 met our selection criteria for meta-analysis. Also, we were interested in investigating different kind of moderators or factors that may influence children's trust in social robots. So we look for investigate moderators such as age, interaction type, interaction length, robot operation, robot-related factors, and type of measure. So when we organize the papers that we found and extract all the data, so we identify two main categories. So so we have these robot-related features or factors that I mentioned before, and the two categories that we identify were more like human-like attributes that represents more like social embodiment in terms of appearance or behavior, and also robot-like attributes that are more related to this mechanical embodiment and also some kind of behavioral control that is more related. So we have these two conditions, and this is important to understand a bit what the results that we got. So for example, if we have a positive effect, it means that the positive effect was on the human-like features on the dependent variables. So this is what we to interpret the results. So we conduct four meta-analytic models. The first one was for social trust, and actually we didn't find any significant difference on this. And the second one for competency trust, and we didn't find a significant difference on the overall meta-analytic model, but we found that moderators, such a type of interaction and robot-related factors, has a positive effect. So it means that human-like attributes has a positive effect on competency trust in this case. The third model was social trust and competency trust combined, and the model was significant only for competency trust. And here the moderators actually were also significant. And in general, we can see that there is a negative effect of the human-like attributes on competency trust. And finally, our fourth model, as I mentioned at the beginning, we were also interested into this relationship between social trust and liking social or prosocial behavior. So our fourth meta-analytic model was focused on this. And again, we only found significance for liking social, where the moderators also were significant and but having a negative effect. So I will move to the key findings, and the first one is actually that Rebecca and I were quite happy because we provided a concrete conceptualization of trust in the two domains, and for social and competency trust. The second one is that there is a negative effect of human-like attributes on children's perception of competency trust in social robots. Another important finding was that we didn't find a significant effect of children's perception of social trust in social robots. However, we found that one of the moderators showed a trend towards significance, and this moderator was the type of measure. And by this, I mean like what kind of instrument we are using to capture children's trust in robots. And in this case, we classify subjective and objective measures, and it means like either we use self-questionnaires or we analyze child's behavior. So, and finally, also an important finding was more like a kind of general finding for human robot interaction in field in general. That was the statistical power. And we found that actually most of the studies were unpowered. And we know that this is a bit difficult, of course, because of it's difficult for us to recruit participants for our studies, especially children. And okay, now with the pandemic is much harder. But I think as a general like takeaway message is that as a researchers, we need to maybe put like a bigger effort on this. Okay, so was our meta-analysis and the theoretical part. So I will move now to the paper for the Roman paper, and I want to make the link first. So we were interested actually into study the effect of the study type. And by the study type, I mean the kind of study or interaction that we are having for example, if I have or we are having a single encounter with the robot or multiple encounters, that is a long-term interaction. And this was I was interested in this because we have 20 studies that met our criteria for meta-analysis, and 18 studies were single encounters with interaction lasts from 6 to 60 minutes, more or less. And just two studies like were for long-term interaction, for social, one for social trust and the other one for competency trust. So we think that here we have like a good room to investigate those kind of effects. And in general, our meta-analysis said that, or suggest that shorter interactions may lead to higher competency trust for single encounters. But we don't have information of what happened in first impressions, and we can have also concrete information of what is happening for long-term interactions, and actually how this trust or judgment of trust is like can be evaluated or developed for longer interactions. So yeah, so for this study, we focus on first impressions. And now I want to mention that actually this is important because uh, when we are talking about the first impressions and emotions, so we make judgments of others' face, stranger faces at the moment that we met them. And actually, literature suggests that as humans, we can make traits or judgments of trustworthiness, likability, and competence in just few milliseconds. And and this is a way on how we can also those kind of emotions can give us a kind or provide some kind of information and not like this is the kind of non-verbal behavior that provides some information. So okay, so now if we move a bit to the motivation of the paper, that what is the role of first impressions in educational settings. So as Joanna mentioned before, so I am part of the ANIMATAS project, and one of the high level goals is to use or to introduce robots as tutors or companions in educational scenarios. So this is why we are focused on, yeah, the focus is also education. So actually, first impression is very important because it helps to establish a communication channel between the child and the tutor robot. And this communication channel can give insights actually to the child if he wants to approach or to avoid. So so now when we are talking about trust and how this like kind of communication channel also is related to trust in child robot interaction, so I want to recall again the definition that we gave, so that we know that trust is a bit difficult to define and a bit difficult to measure, but for this study we wanted to keep the two dimensions that we proposed or identified before, that for social trust and for competency trust. And this is consistent with the literature actually that suggests that children rely on the perception of competence and benevolence to determine whom to trust. So, and now is the relationship between trust, emotions, and first encounters that I know maybe is a lot of concepts at the same time, but I have a point. So, actually, for this study, we took inspiration from Todorov. And Todorov suggests that he proposed this trustworthy dimension, and he suggests that happy faces uh, elicit more trust than angry faces, and um, and also that we as humans are able to make those kind of judgments in just like few milliseconds. And actually this study was somehow like not replicate but was kind of baseline for further studies with children that actually suggest that they also rely on facial expressions of emotions to determine who to trust and actually to take information for it. So we wanted to know if we can actually uh, apply or try to extend this theory to shared robot interaction, and we think that it may be useful because the result may affect also the way we are designing social robots, and what is the implication of emotions when we want to use these kind of robots. So for this study, so following like Theodorov, so we wanted to manipulate uh, um, this trustworthy dimension using anger and happiness, as Todorov proposed. And for the intensity of the emotion, so we want is more related to the strength of emotion. So also we manipulate that. And based on this, we propose three research questions. And the first one is the a research question related to the emotion type. And we wanted to know if actually the emotion display, the type of the emotion displayed by the robot affects children's perception of trustworthiness, likability, and competence. And follow this research from psychology, we also hypothesize that the robot that expresses happiness is perceived as most trustworthy, likable, and competent than the robot that expresses anger. The second research question is more related to the intensity level, and here is more, we want to identify, also to investigate if the emotion intensity influence children's perception of trustworthiness, likability, and competence. And for this, we hypothesize that children perceive the robot that expresses higher levels of happiness are more trustworthy, likable, and competent, and the robot that expresses higher levels of anger as less trustworthy, likable, and competent. And finally, our third research question is try to investigate gender's likeness. We again, like we wanted to know if this emotion maybe has an effect on the together with the gender likability of the gender likeness of the robot. And we hypothesize that actually children perceive the female-like robot as more trustworthy, likable, and competent than the male-like robot. So in order to investigate or to address our research questions, we have this study. We designed this study with three independent variables. And the first independent variables is the emotion type with two levels for happiness and anger. So these are the two levels. This is balance dimension that is kind mimics the trustworthy dimension, and this was a between subject factor. The second independent variable is intensity level with three levels, that is low, medium, and high, and also is a between subject factor. And we can see here, this is also our intensity dimension. And finally, our third dependent variable was gender likeness with two levels, female and male-like robots. And this was a within subject factor. It means that children were exposed, or they evaluated one stimulus for female and one for male-like robot. So we manipulated some action units, and we end up with a set of 12 stimuli to be projected onto the forehead robot, 6 for female-like robot and 6 for male-like robot. And we validate this our set of stimuli on an online study using Amazon Mechanical Turk in order to actually, to validate if users could like recognize properly the type of emotion and also the level of intensity. Concerning measures, we measure social or prosocial or social liking was captured by measuring likability in terms of appearance and friendliness. And for this study, we couldn't measure social competency trust, because most of the time this is evaluated or assessed when there is an interaction, and in our study was first impressions. So, but we decided to rely on children's perceptions of smartness and helpfulness of the robot. So we measure competence And finally, we chose four items for trustworthiness that are more related to social trust. Um, and this is the questionnaire we used. And okay, in our study, 129 participants, children participated, aged from 9 to 14 years old, and this study was carried out in a science fair. So, and each participant, as I mentioned before, observed two facial expressions of emotion for 5 seconds each. And I want to say here that we didn't provide any kind of information to the child uh, concerning the gender of the robot nor the emotion. So was completely, so they were, the children were debriefed after they evaluate the robot. Okay, so I will move to the results. The first one, that the first research question was related to this emotion type. And we found a significant effect on the emotion type on the perception of on likability in terms of appearance, friendliness. Um, we found also a significant effect on competence, but just for smartness, not for helpfulness. And we didn't find any significant effect of emotion type on trustworthiness. We can see here the this graph with some of the results. So we can say that actually our hypothesis was true, but just for likability and for smartness. This is kind of consistent with the state of the art that, yeah, like happy faces are perceived as more likable. The second research question is intended to investigate the intensity level of the emotion. So again, we found a significant effect of likability of an appearance and friendly of the independent variable on likability in terms of appearance and friendliness, on competence just in terms of smartness. And again, we didn't find any significant effect of the independent variable on trustworthiness. And this is the graph of the results. And actually, we found a very interesting result because we hypothesized that, okay, medium, also like higher happiness will be perceived as more likable, but the results show like the opposite, like children like low happiness over medium happiness. And we probably this result is related to the fact that children may perceive like the lower happiness as more authentic than the higher happiness. And also, but however, children perceive like high happiness also like contribute to competence as more competent. So also this result may be related to the fact that children are better at just higher levels of an emotion for competence. And the third research question that is more related is intended to investigate the gender likeness of the robot. We didn't find any significant effect on the dependent variables. However, we found an interaction effect between gender likeness and the emotion intensity on likability. And results suggest that the male like robot was perceived as more likable when it expresses high anger and low happiness over medium anger. However, the female like robot was perceived as less likable when it expresses high anger rather than the other kind of emotions that we were displaying. And this is actually was kind of interesting because we think, or we this result may suggest or may point to gender stereotypes, and I think it would be interesting for future research. Okay, so at this point, actually, we were quite curious why we didn't find a significant effect on trustworthiness. So we wanted to investigate the role of likability and competence, and the relationship of these constructs with trustworthiness. So we decided to run correlation regression analysis to investigate if likability and competence can be predictors of trustworthiness. And actually, we found that friendliness is a predictor of keeping secrets. And this is may be related to the, again, to the what theory says, or what we have found before, that it is overlapping between friendliness, likability, and social trust. And as I mentioned before, we use like keeping secrets as a item to measure social trust. Concerning competence, we found that smartness is also a predictor of keeping secrets, truth teller, and trust. And helpfulness is also a predictor of truth teller, influence, and trust. So at this point, also, we can say that actually the perception of competence may give more information about children's trust in social robots. Okay, so this is the paper, and I want to conclude with these key findings. The first one is that actually, 5 seconds were enough for children to judge the likability and competence of the robot. And the second one was the gender of the robot influence children's judgments of appearance only when the robot expresses happiness or anger at different levels of intensity. And as I mentioned before, this could be interesting also to investigate in the future this kind of stereotypes. And the perception, and the last one is that the perception of trust was not literally judged from facial expressions, but rather mediated by children's perception of robots' likability and competence. And also, this is a very interesting to investigate for a, as I'm for a longer interaction, or even for multiple encounters, because there is evidence in studies with adults that actually the first impressions of competence are maintained for a long time so it could be interesting, and it could provide some kind of evidence and a starting point to start to investigate how children develop this relationship with the robot, and how is the development of trust itself during the interaction. So I will conclude this talk with this part. So those are the reference that I have used, some of the reference, and thank you so much. I hope that you like it, and I'm super happy to start the discussion and answer questions.
Thank you, Natalia. This was a very interesting talk. I also have a few questions, but if someone in the audience would like to jump in and ask something to Natalia, please do. You can write it down or just raise your hand to speak up. Okay, so I have a question. How do you plan to move from this first impression study to the long-term interaction perceptions of trust? So you gave a hint in the last sentence, but the way I conceptualize this is like, okay, so the child likes the anger male robot. Mm-hmm. And associates positive competence and likability with that. How do you envision that would impact long-term interactions? Do you envision that we'll have an anger personality at all interactions with that child? How would that work? Do you have some intuition on that?
Yes, actually, thank you for your question. We were actually trying to investigate how we can use these preliminary findings, and this is more related to the learning tasks or the kind of game or type of study that we are going to have. For example, now we are trying to investigate a bit more like this, as you mentioned, the robot's personality and how the robot's personality may actually influence children's strengths in robots, but also like learning in the task. So it's a way also to apply this, and it's not like I want to have like an angry robot during the whole interaction, but is to play a bit more with this kind of different emotional states, because it's not always true that we have found that children like want to see a happy robot all the time. So it's more just to play a bit more with that and to see if we have some insights, and actually how these kind of emotions like are that is more related to the expressiveness of the robot can yeah can contribute to this trust model that we want to build. So
So, as a follow-up, do you think that is a cultural? You mentioned stereotypes, but do you think that's a cultural thing?
um could be, I think, but actually I was I don't know if this is kind of something that is my personal opinion, because we ran the study in Sweden, and in Sweden we actually like there is this promotion of gender equality and these kind of things. So when we got this result, we I was quite surprised because I didn't expect that. Not here, maybe
Yeah,
maybe I'm a bit biased. So I I think it may be like cultural, but also it could be related to the how kind of information that we are receiving like since we are little, so
yeah.
that how it influence. And so maybe we are not
I just find that very interesting. So I worked with
yeah,
children, and here in Portugal, I don't see that happening, but I may be totally wrong. So that's why I was asking.
yeah.
Um,
This is it was yeah, surprising, and especially for this because if for yeah, in this country that there is like this huge movement of gender equality, and still there are those kind of
yeah.
stereotypes.
So I think we have a question from Mike Lightheart. Um,
Yes,
yeah.
hello.
Hello.
So I was wondering about the effect sizes of the effects you found, and more specifically, I was wondering if you could maybe contextualize the role of the facial expressions in relation to trust and likability, etc., compared to other effects that might be in play. So, if I remember correctly, in the Hancock paper, they also identified the performance of the robot as the most the biggest factor, basically. So how would you position this compared to those other factors?
Okay. To answer your, thank you for your questions. To answer your first question, actually, um, because we have like a lot of conditions, so our effect size wasn't that big. So it was something that actually I mentioned before the study that we found is how in human robot interaction and in child robot interaction, most of the time the studies are empowered. And I think here my problem was that I had a lot of conditions. So even though
Sorry.
even though I have or more than over like 100 children participated, when if divided like in 6 conditions will be around 2025. So that was yeah, something that I would like to improve. And concerning your second question, yeah, I agree that performance is the, as Hancock said, like the performance is the stronger attribute. However, okay, in this study, we don't evaluate this. Uh, because it was first impressions. But I think that also the fact that we don't have like, or we don't have like a, we have these inconsistent findings in the literature that sometimes an emotional robot or expressive robot has a positive effect, other times has a negative effect, other times don't have an effect at all. So I think it's very interesting to start to provide more information, no, rather than the performance of the robot, even though, like, of course, the performance is super important. But for example, and now maybe I'm explaining, but for example, now that we want to, or one of my goals in the near future is to start to include uh, these kind of machine learning or deep learning models in child-robot interaction. So I think one of the maybe starting points could be analyze this emotional part. Seems like the performance like in child robot interaction, I don't know if we can have like automated like interaction right now. So I think was, yeah, I want to move like towards that part.
Okay, so I think, thank you, Natalia. I think we have a question from Rebecca. Rebecca, please go ahead.
Hi guys. So yeah, I have a question about the conceptualization of social trust because we found in our meta-analysis that that there wasn't these strong effects on social trust, and then also in your paper that you just described, you talked about also struggling to find an effect for social trust. So what do you think about this idea of social trust as its own construct, as opposed to these ideas of liking and rapport and friendship? Like, do you think that it is meaningful in its own right, or could we kind of reach the same conclusions by focusing on these bigger constructs of friendship and liking, etc.?
That's a good question, right?
Sorry, I know that that's kind of mean.
I think we let me think. Okay, first, I think it's important to start like looking at this social trust as an unique construct, because I don't know. Yeah, I think there are different. I don't know how to explain this, but there are different, like, actually, as we found in this in this study, that friendliness was a predictor of keeping secrets, and we said, okay, keeping secrets is one of the measures or the items that we used to measure social trust. So I think like somehow there is like a kind of relationship, and we need to find, like, I don't know how to explain that, to set like a kind of threshold maybe between these two concepts, because yeah, I don't know, but I think it's not necessary that most of the time, like, children, for example, will disclose with a secret to that robot, or maybe if they do, if they consider the robot as a friend or not. So I think it's still that we need to keep the difference between these kind of constructs. But yeah, I know that it's hard also to do so, and also because the way that also we discussed that the way that we define this, and the way that we think as adults and researchers, that we can measure friendliness or trust is completely different, and from children, and the sources that children like used to make those judgments are also, yeah, different. So I think we need more evidence and more studies, and that's good that our field is still a baby. So.
Yeah, because I guess there's like the two sides of things. There's like the theory side on whether they are different constructs, and then there's the measurement side on whether we can capture these differences, whether they exist or not. So there's room for research in both, I guess.
Yes, and also because now, yeah, and also one of the definitions that have been used for trust, like was proposed in 67, and still like from psychology, like there are some maybe no, but different kind of opinions. So the first you say that in human robot interaction, like the meta-analysis on Hancock, like established like, okay, this is like the point that is important to start study trust in human robot interaction, and was 10 years ago. So still we have a room. Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Natalia.
So is there any more questions that you want to ask? Mary Ellen, go ahead.
Oh, just a quick question. I may have missed bits of this, but did you do all your stuff with, like, Fur Hat has a face that can make facial expression? I assume you're doing most of your stuff with a Fur Hat robot that your pictures are mostly of.
Pardon, can you repeat your question, please?
Sorry, my microphone is probably too far away from me. So you did most of your experiments with, like, the Fur Hat robot, right? Which has a face, which can make expressions. Have you? So obviously you can send a huge amount of an impression in 5 seconds if you can look angry or happy or whatever. What about a robot like Pepper or Now that just kind of, it always looks the same? I guess, how would you see that fitting into sort of the I mean, but you can other do things with body language and sort of things like that. How would it work if the robot didn't have a face, basically, is what I'm asking, I guess.
Okay. Okay, I think yeah, I have read some studies that actually those kind of robots like also can or have some movements, body movement that also represent some kind of emotions, and they are these like 6 basic emotions. I am not sure if actually like children can identify those emotions in just like few seconds. If we did it with these facial expressions, I think it will be a bit harder, even like for some adults. I think, okay, when the Pepper or Now or those humanoid robots like move like very fast and move the arms, so it's a bit, we can say like, it's easier to identify happiness, but for example, when it's shy, or I think so, I don't know. Maybe I will include some kind of prosody, probably some kind of speech that may help the user, not only the child, but in general the user, to identify those emotions and to set like, yeah, to classify them maybe. So I think would be the way. Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah, I was just kind of wondering, just because Fur Hat is a very specific robot that has an extremely expressive face, and most robots that we actually use don't have such controllable faces. So
yes, and actually recently we also were working with this robot, Emis, that also can have play a bit, yeah, with facial expressions. And even though like sometimes for some people it was easier to identify different emotions, so in our scenario we help Emmys with this kind of verbal behaviors. So of course, like or with this prosody also say, no, I'm super excited. Of course, if it's excited, so it's of kind of, yeah, obvious that it's happy. But yeah, I think we need to use different kind of modalities to try to be more specific.
Okay, so since we are reaching the time, I would like to invite you to continue this discussion in the Slack channel. You can. I would also like to remind you that you can also engage with the previous speakers. So if you'd like to, if you saw the talk on the YouTube channel and you'd like to discuss that with them, you can do that as well. So let me share my screen. So we'll have a next session in 2 weeks time. So it's on the November 27th, and we have the pleasure to present the work, to have Manuel Biet from the Sorbonne University, and he's presenting and his work on integrating an observer in interactive reinforcement learning to learn legible trajectories. So we will make a link available and we'll ask you to register for it again. I think it worked well this time. And we would also like to thank for the partnership with RoboHub that advertised Talking Robotics in their social media. And I think that's all for today. I'd like to thank you very much for being here and for this very interesting discussion. And thank you, Natalia, for your time and for presenting your work.
Thank you all for joining today, and thank you to the organizers. This is like really nice and I think valuable space for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Natalia.
Thank you everyone for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
See you next time.
Bye.
Thank you.